So I'm now joined by Pamela Draper, who is the president of Digital Commerce Payments, and another one of the panelists that was speaking on the earlier panels this morning. So thank you very much for joining me, Pamela.
Thank you very much for having me on.
So in your panel, you were talking a lot about innovation, what's coming, open banking. Just explain a little bit about what you do and how you work within the Canadian industry, because you don't just work in automotive, you work across all verticals, sort of everywhere.
Yeah, so our business has a Schedule 1 licensed Canadian bank within its corporate structure, Digital Commerce Bank. Schedule 1 is the same license as another big Canadian bank such as RBC or BMO, but we just use our license very differently in that we use it primarily to facilitate access to the payment rails so that businesses, if they have an online website or a mobile application, can move funds on and off of their platform and to their stakeholders.
So just payment rails was a new thing for me. Being from the UK, it's a different terminology for that kind of open banking. But can you just explain to me a little bit about what that means? Because again, I was actually Googling payment rails while I was sitting in your talk. So just explain, because I don't know whether the audience would have heard about that or... Yeah.
So payment rails really refers to a method of moving money. This could be Visa and MasterCard, or they're each their own individual rails. Stable coins in the crypto space would be another type of rail. In Canada, we have something called e-transfer, which is a payment rail in and of itself. It would be similar to a Venmo or a Zelle in the US. So it's really just a method of sending payment. And it's different than open banking. Open banking is the concept of the individual having agency over its banking data and individual data so that they can open that up to the market and allow fintechs to develop essentially directly to that, as opposed to the banks maintaining each of that information individually and of themselves.
Cool. So that's there's a load of kind of information about how your money is managed, how it's moved around. From a consumer, because we're a B2B podcast, we work primarily with retailers who are providing a financial way to fund your vehicle or pay for a service, and I think what we've seen with direct payments is things like deposit payments. So it's the smaller payments where you might just pay a deposit to hold a vehicle. So in terms of general digital commerce, where do you see the majority of the applications or the use cases? Because e-commerce is everywhere.
And everyone understands e-commerce. So it could be used in e-commerce, but it could be used in a number of other different scenarios. And I always find it's helpful to provide a couple examples because it's hard to understand our business. It's moving money electronically. So if you can't see it, it's hard to understand.
It's not real.
It's not real, exactly. So one of our clients works in the tax return business, a company called Liberty Tax in Canada. At tax return time, they have a need to remit money from the Canadian Revenue Agency if they're getting a refund to their end clients for whom they've prepared the tax return. Our technology powers that end-to-end payment, getting money from the government to the person who's done their tax return. That's one use case. Another use case would be if in Canada we've legalized online gaming, sports betting sites in certain provinces. You need to move money onto the platform in order to place a bet, and then if you win your bet, you need to move money off the platform. Our technology powers that money movement direct from the bank onto the betting site and then again off of the betting site. Credit card companies often aren't involved in that. We do e-commerce as well. That would be another industry vertical, but the industry verticals are many and across the board.
So what are you seeing? One of the other things that we heard today, which surprised me, was just the amount of regulation between provinces that makes trading and commerce quite challenging.
I think what you're hearing at the event is province to province, the regulations can be quite different, particularly on the securities side of things. So the securities meaning stocks or other publicly traded kind of instruments, stable coins, it touches the crypto world. For the payment space, the regulation actually is centralized at the federal level, but it does, as of this year, it will fall under two different acts. So one would be FinTrack, which focuses more on kind of an AML regime. And then the second one is retail payments, which is to protect the retail customer processing payments. So very soon, although it's not province to province, companies operating in the space like ours will have two different regulatory bodies within one country that they have to effectively manage. And a lot of the regulations under those two regulatory bodies are somewhat similar in nature, things like reporting and transaction monitoring. So come September, when the RPA comes into effect, we'll have to report to FinTrack like we've always done, but we will also similarly have to report and be accountable to the Bank of Canada through the RPA.
So RPA means?
Retail Payments Activities Act.
Okay. And then you also mentioned AML, which means?
Anti-money laundering.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So it's like we have so many different acronyms across the industry about how do you move money.
Yes.
And I think probably in the automotive space, you wouldn't be moving money from unless there was a refund to pay. So actually, if you have pay down a deposit to hold a vehicle and then you repay that deposit, they would use something like your technology to be able to do that. So the money goes back to the consumer and then you just take the deposit out of the finance payment potentially, or you just pay it back and then your finance payment is standalone?
Yeah, we have companies in Canada that sell used cars online, for example, like a Clutch Auto would be an example of a company like that in Canada. So they've used our types of payments in various ways. One might be a deposit. One, depending on the value of the used car, might be to pay out the entire balance. Another might be, if that car was financed, to pay out the balance of that loan and redistribute any additional proceeds back to the customer.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of different use cases, and those are done in Canada either by e-transfer, by EFT, which both of those are direct bank integrations, or they could be on the Visa and MasterCard rails, as we spoke about, through a product like a Visa Direct or a MasterCard Send.
So there's so much going on, and one of the other podcast guests earlier on, they were talking about how do you make sure that you partner with people that follow regulation, and actually it's upon the lenders to make sure that they are absolutely compliant with regulation. And so most of the people that we speak to are partnering with fintech or partnering with lenders because what they do is just sell a product to a consumer, and the fintech is the way by which the consumer pays for it.
Right.
So I suppose it's just, is there anything that will help retailers or manufacturers in the automotive space that do they need to be aware of or mindful of in terms of how open banking is, like data rails, like all of these kind of different new terminologies that are coming at them thick and fast that they should be keeping themselves up to speed with?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important because any one of the companies in the space is touching your money. So that not only puts the funds at risk if there's a bad actor at play or a negligent actor at play, but it also puts the data at risk. So all the personal data, the card data potentially. So in Canada, there's a number of different regulations. You can check to see if we're regulated by FinTrack, that's an online list. You can check to see if we're regulated by the RPAA, that's another online list. And then there's things you can ask the company for, like if they're using any card data, they need to be PCI compliant. So you can ask them for their PCI certification, things like that.
Yeah.
Also, as I mentioned, we have a Schedule 1 licensed Canadian bank in our corporate structure regulated by OSFI. So that's another thing that you can check. And it just shows that the principles within our business are held to a certain standard.
Yeah, absolutely right. So it's there's a lot to think about, but making sure that you're partnering with companies that are following the rules, that are regulated in the right way, have the right licensing. And also the point about managing data is really important. So actually how you make sure that card data isn't compromised, your customers' banking data isn't compromised, that you're using the right systems by which you take payments and refund payments in a way that make sure that you're keeping it safe and secure for customers and also safe and secure for yourself. So
yeah, the right systems, but also the right policies and procedures and team structure in place.
Yeah, absolutely right. Pamela Draper, once again from Digital Commerce Bank, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you.